going to do example 1, and we are going to use the properties of real numbers that we saw in the previous video. Okay, so example 1 is going to be x plus 3 equals 5. And I'm going to show you how we can solve x plus 3 equals 5 using the properties of real numbers. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use the inverse property of addition. So I'm going to say INV for short, inverse property of addition, okay? And the inverse property of addition says that if I have a number and I subtract that same number, I get 0. So that's what we're going to do to 3 right here. We have a positive 3, and we're going to subtract 3. Now, because this is an equation, when I make one change to one side, I have to make the same change to the other side of the equal sign. So putting minus 3 on the x plus 3 side below the 3 means I have to put another minus 3 on the side that has 5. Okay, so I have x, and then 3 minus 3 is going to be 0 because of our inverse property of addition. So we're going to put plus 0 right here equals 5 minus 3. 5 minus 3 is 2. Now, we have x plus 0, so we can use the identity property of addition. Identity property of addition. Okay, and the identity property of addition says if I have a number and I add 0, I get the same number. So this is just going to be x equals 2. And that's the answer to our equation. Now, this step right here, the identity property, that step is normally skipped. I'm showing you right now so that you can see where our properties show up and how we use them. But this step right here would normally be skipped. Okay, so let's move on to example 2. So I'm going to erase the board. Let me stop for a second so you can pause the video and maybe write some notes down for a second. Okay. So now we're going to go to example 2. So example 2 is going to be 2x plus 3 equals 7. Okay, so first of all, I've got a plus 3 on the side that has x. I want x to be by itself, so I need to remove the 3. So I need a 0 here. So I need to use the inverse property of addition. So I'm going to say minus 3. And on both sides because this is an equation. So we're going to get 2x plus 0 equals 7 minus 3. Well, that's 4. So now we're going to use the identity property of addition. And the identity property says if I have a number and I add it to 0, I get the same number. So this is just 2x equals 4. Now remember, this step, normally we skip this step. We normally skip this step, but I'm showing you right now so you can see how the properties work. Okay. Now, we have 2. This is 2 times x equals 4. So I need to use another inverse property. I need to use the inverse property. And since this is 2 times x, I need to use the inverse property of multiplication. Inverse property of multiplication. And the inverse property of multiplication says if I have a number and I divide by the same number, so we have 2, we're going to divide by 2 on both sides, then that number is 1. So 2 divided by 2 is 1 times x equals 4 divided by 2, that is 2. And now we have 1 times x. That goes back to our identity property of multiplication. So we're going to use the identity property of multiplication. Okay, and the identity property of multiplication says 1 times a number is that same number. So this is just x equals 2, and there's our solution. Once again, this identity property, we normally skip this step. Okay, so in the next example, I'll show you a little bit with the identity properties, but I'm going to skip them for the most part. So feel free to go to the next video in this series.